I want to make an enchantment land room. The new room type in Duskmourn is super interesting, and lands have depicted rooms plenty throughout Magic's history, so it makes sense to try to combine them. That said, from a mechanical standpoint, they seem really incompatible, so let's break them down and see if we can make it work. Rooms are a split card of a permanent that shares the same type line. When you cast one half of the room, it enters and that half of the room becomes unlocked. But if we want our room to be a land, it's not going to have a mana cost, and you can't cast it. So it's just going to be cards that you play as a land, and it will have no rooms unlocked. What's the point of a land that has no rules text? Well, all of the basic lands have no rules text. They instead get their ability to tap for mana from their type line, which is something that we have access to even while the room is still locked and is completely blank. This puts us in a really good position to make a cycle of mythic lands that depict the regions of the house, the boiler villages or the flood pits or whatever. But that still leaves us with a land that's effectively just a basic without the basic land type and with a different name. Or, well, actually with no name, at least not until it gets unlocked. Could you add rules text to a card like this and then unlock it later? Well, normally, you can unlock a room that's already on the battlefield by paying its mana cost. But having no mana cost and having a mana cost of 0 are very different in Magic. Having no mana cost does mean that it has a mana value of 0, but it isn't actually a mana cost, so you can't pay it. You're going to have to find some other way to unlock the room, kind of like having to find another way to cast a suspend card that has 0 mana cost, or Azmarina Marika Dyson to Kulakar, which really means that we have a land with a secret room. That's actually kind of cool. The idea that you have this land that is otherwise pretty normal, pretty basic, and then if you can find a way to unlock the secret room, if you have the keys to the house or Marina takes you there personally, you can get access to a secret no one else has access to. Secret places in the regions that you can only get to if you know where to look. In something like Commander, this is going to be super inconsistent. There's only a couple cards that can directly unlock rooms, because it's a new thing that only came out in this set. However, in constructed formats, where you can have 4 copies of every card that does it, it might not be that hard. An interesting upside of this being a land is that, well, normally you might think, ooh, I want to cheat out this 8 cost half of a room by playing the first half and then cracking my keys to unlock the second. But you had to play the first half. Here, we can say it's 0 mana. It's a land drop to get the land into play in the first place. And then we can crack our keys to unlock one of the 2 rooms. I think that's actually really interesting. It means we can design these rooms to be something worth cheating out, but you can only get them cheated out. The question then becomes, is there a downside to this room? Wizards really doesn't like to print lands that have the basic land type without having a downside. Usually a land either is as good as a basic but doesn't have the basic land type, or it does have a basic land type but it enters tapped or something like that. Some other downside. With us, our text boxes are blank. We can't give it rules text that has a downside, unless it's some rules that come into play in your hand or your graveyard or something like that. Instead, I'd rather once again look to the only element that we have access to at all times, the type line. Legendary is inherently a downside. We don't think of it that way a lot of the time, but it is. You can only have one legendary permanent with the same name at any given time, or you have to sacrifice all others. So we slap legendary on here, and suddenly we have a downside that's always in play. Well, kind of. See, in addition to what I said about basic land types, Wizards also really doesn't like printing legendary lands. They get stuck in your hand, they feel like missing a land drop, they're just a feel-bad situation a lot of the time. But this legendary land won't legend rule itself until you unlock a room. See, it has no name, so it doesn't share a name with any other instances of itself on the battlefield. Only if you actually go to one of these secret rooms is the name in play and able to start legend ruling. Now this does a couple things. It means we don't have to worry about the legend rule kind of making the cards unplayable, and it also means that we can have this inherent downside attached to the card, but only if you actually take advantage of it being a room does the downside come into play. So where does that leave us? I think we should make a legendary cycle of lands, one for each of the regions of the house. To illustrate, here's a single card breaking down how that might look. The Boiler Bilge's Furnace and the Razor Mazes are 2 halves of the legendary enchantment land room mountain. The left half reads, when the Boiler Bilge's Furnace becomes unlocked, deal 13 damage to each permanent, then sacrifice this permanent. I like this. It's the furnace exploding. Don't go there. It's dangerous. The Razor mazes read, tap. For as long as this permanent remains tapped, if a source would deal damage to a permanent you don't control or an opponent, it deals double that damage to that permanent or player instead. So this legendary land now has two halves, and both of them kind of turn off its landness. In the one hand, it gets sacrificed, it goes away, it becomes a single wrath and you get rid of it. On the other hand, you've got this ongoing effect at the cost of it being tapped down and no longer able to function as a land. I'm super happy with this direction. I'm not going to build all 5 lands in the cycle right now. If you have any ideas, I'd love to hear them. What's cool to me about this is that it's a format that does let us create a cycle of lands. What they actually do is sort of moot. Either way, that's all I've got for this week. Hope you're enjoying Duskmourn. I've been Darcy Bits. Have a good night, and I'll see you in the next one.